In June of 2026, Canada's industry minister flew to China and did something no close ally of the United States ever had. She stood in front of four of China's biggest car makers and asked them to build their electric cars on Canadian soil, not ship them across the border. Build them inside the North American market Detroit has run for 100 years. For a century, that market moved as one machine. American engines, Canadian plants, one industry. It just started cracking down the middle, and the people who built it are the ones being left outside. So how does a whole continent's car industry, built for decades as a single machine, split in two? Start with how it was actually put together. For most of the last 100 years, there was no such thing as an American car or a Canadian car. There was a North American car, an engine cast in Michigan, a transmission from Ontario, wiring from Mexico, bolted together at a plant that could sit on either side of the border. Parts crossed that border 6 or 7 times before a single car was finished. Picture one long assembly line that happens to run through 3 countries, with Detroit at the center, because Detroit designed the system and set the rules. That made all 3 countries rich, and it made them need each other. Canada built the cars, America bought most of them, and the whole thing only worked as long as everyone agreed on who to let in. On China, the answer used to be simple: keep them out. Canada put a 100% tariff on Chinese electric cars, matching Washington almost move for move. Then Canada changed its mind, quietly and then all at once. Instead of letting a few Chinese cars in, Ottawa started asking a bigger question. What if China didn't ship the cars at all? What if China built them here, in Canadian plants, with Canadian workers? That question is what put the first crack in the machine, because Detroit was never asked it and never wanted it asked. Here is what that question turned into. In June of 2026, Canada's industry minister, Melanie Joly, traveled to China in person and met 4 of its largest automakers. BYD, one of the biggest electric car makers on Earth, Chery; Geely, the group that already owns Volvo; and a 4th firm, Shanghai Launch Automotive Technology. She wasn't there to sell shipping permits. She was there to pitch them on becoming Canadian manufacturers. And this is the detail everyone missed. The big 3 came back willing. BYD, Chery, and Geely told Joly they would explore joint ventures to build electric vehicles inside Canada. That was a real reversal, because only months earlier, a top BYD executive had flatly said a joint venture would not work. By June, the same company was at the table. Canada didn't offer this for free. Joly set 4 strict conditions, all aimed at protecting the roughly 500,000 Canadians whose jobs depend on the car industry. Any plant has to be a joint venture with majority Canadian ownership. It has to buy from Canadian suppliers, it has to follow Canadian labor law, and the Chinese partner has to guarantee the data security of every Canadian who drives one of these cars. Ottawa's phrase for the policy was blunt: build where you sell. There is even a building waiting. General Motors owns an assembly plant in Ingersoll, Ontario called CAMI, and it has sat idle since GM killed its electric delivery van. It was purpose-built for electric vehicles, it still has the tooling, it still has the trained workers, and GM wants to sell. A Chinese automaker that meets Canada's conditions could walk in and turn the lights back on. And this isn't a one-off idea. Ottawa looked at a second site, the Brampton plant in Ontario, before setting it aside. And BYD already runs an electric bus factory north of Toronto, opened back in 2019, just nowhere near big enough to turn out passenger cars at scale. So think about what CAMI would mean. An American company's shuttered EV plant reopened to build Chinese cars on Canadian ground. For most of the past decade, Canada moved in lockstep with the United States on China. That is exactly what is now flipping. Because the moment Canada builds Chinese cars, the machine faces a question it was never designed for. What happens at the border? Washington has already answered. Chinese electric cars, even ones assembled in Canada, are not welcome in the American market, on grounds of data security and connected cars that talk to foreign servers. So picture it. A car rolls out of an Ontario plant. For 100 years, a car like that crossed into Michigan freely. Now it could be stopped at the same border it used to ignore. And pay attention to this next detail, because it explains everything. Cars built in Canada are still full of American parts. The supply chains never separated. So if Washington walls off Canadian-built Chinese cars, it is partly walling off its own components too. The machine is so tangled that cutting one country hurts all three. There is no clean way to pull it apart. This is why Detroit isn't reacting calmly. The group that speaks for General Motors, Ford, and Stellantis called Canada's China deal a vehicle-sized irritant hanging over trade talks, and the three companies warned in a joint statement that it could undermine Canada's auto sector and put the whole integrated North American supply chain at risk. Translation, from the people who built the system: you are breaking our machine. Their tool to stop it is a calendar. The three countries are due to review their trade pact, and Detroit wants new rules to disqualify any Chinese-linked manufacturing from crossing the border tariff-free. A year ago, that review looked like paperwork. It is now the wall Detroit is counting on. Strip away the price tags, and you can see what this fight is actually about. Who gets to build the future, and where? For 100 years, the safe move was to build wherever Detroit built. Canada is now making the opposite bet. Ottawa has openly said it wants to cut its dependence on the American market and double its trade with everyone else inside 10 years. Inviting China to build cars in Ontario is that whole strategy in a single move. And notice who sits on the other side of this bet. China, the builder. It makes the batteries, it makes the cars, it makes them cheaply, and here it is being invited in rather than forcing its way. The question Canada is really asking is simple and a little brutal. If the future of the car is electric, and the company that builds it best is Chinese, why keep saying no? Now, be fair to the doubters. Critics warn a Chinese joint venture can quietly become token assembly, a badge on a building with little real Canadian control, and they are right to watch for it. That is exactly what majority ownership and local suppliers are meant to prevent. The bigger catch is honest. Nothing here is built yet. No steel is in the ground. These are conditions, willingness, and one empty plant, not a finished factory, and the talks could still collapse. But notice which way the panic runs. Not from Ottawa, not from Beijing, from Detroit. Analysts at the Council on Foreign Relations spelled out why. If this holds, the United States could end up an isolated island of gas-powered cars in an electric world led by China, the incumbent of 100 years standing outside a market it used to own. If you would rather understand shifts like this than be blindsided by them, this channel is built for you. Subscribe and follow where this one goes. 100 years ago, Detroit designed a machine that ran through 3 countries and put itself at the center. In June, Canada walked into China and started building a different one. The real question now isn't whether China can build cars in Canada. It clearly can. It is whether the United States can afford to stand outside of it. If you ran Detroit today, what would you do?